March 15th, 1943. Office of Naval Intelligence, Washington, D.C. Commander Ellis Zacharias stared at the decoded intercept for the third time, his coffee growing cold in the pre-dawn darkness. The message from a British coastwatcher in the Solomon Islands described a Japanese battleship so massive that its displacement exceeded any warship ever constructed. The reported main battery specifications were even more incredible. 18.1-inch guns, nearly 2 feet in diameter, capable of hurling a projectile weighing more than an automobile across 25 miles of ocean. Zacharias had served in naval intelligence since before Pearl Harbor. He had learned to separate fact from fiction, to distinguish genuine intelligence from propaganda designed to demoralize Allied forces. But this report challenged everything he knew about naval construction. The world's largest operational battleships, Britain's HMS Vanguard and America's Iowa-class, displaced approximately 45,000 tons. The Japanese ship described in this intercept supposedly weighed 72,000 tons, 60% larger than anything afloat. He reached for his telephone to call Rear Admiral Theodore Wilkinson, Director of Naval Intelligence. Before he could lift the receiver, his assistant entered carrying another decoded message. This one came from a submarine commander operating near Truk Lagoon, who reported observing what he described as a floating steel mountain. The submariner, a veteran of multiple Pacific patrols whose previous reports had proven accurate, estimated the vessel's length at over 800 feet, with a beam exceeding 120 feet. Most striking was his observation of the main battery turrets, each appearing larger than an entire destroyer's forward section. 2 independent reports describing impossible specifications, arriving within hours of each other, demanded immediate attention. Zacharias gathered his materials and headed to Wilkinson's office, where a conversation would begin that would consume American naval intelligence for the next 2 years. The hunt to confirm or debunk the existence of what would become known as the Yamato-class battleships had begun. The first hints of Japan's super battleship program had actually reached American intelligence years before Pearl Harbor, though nobody recognized them as such at the time. In 1937, Japan had formally withdrawn from the naval limitation treaties that had governed warship construction since the Washington Naval Conference of 1922. These treaties had restricted battleship displacement to 35,000 tons and main battery caliber to 16 inches. Japan's withdrawal raised obvious questions about their construction plans, but American analysts assumed any new Japanese battleships would represent modest increases over treaty limitations, perhaps 40,000 tons with 16 or 17-inch guns. What American intelligence failed to grasp was the depth of Japanese determination to construct vessels capable of offsetting American numerical superiority. Japanese naval doctrine since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 had emphasized quality over quantity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had later planned the Pearl Harbor attack, had long advocated for a smaller number of extremely powerful vessels rather than matching American production ship for ship. The Washington Naval Treaty's 5-5-3 ratio, which limited Japan to 60% of American and British tonnage, had reinforced this quality-focused approach. In May 1934, even before withdrawing from the treaties, the Imperial Japanese Navy had begun preliminary design studies for a new class of capital ships, unconstrained by international agreements. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto led the design team with instructions to create a battleship capable of engaging multiple American vessels simultaneously. The specifications evolved through numerous iterations, but from the beginning, the design philosophy centered on overwhelming firepower and heavy armor protection. The gun caliber selection process revealed Japanese strategic thinking. 16-inch guns matching American and British standards would provide no tactical advantage. 17-inch guns represented only marginal improvement, but 18-inch weapons would deliver shells weighing 3,200 pounds compared to 2,700 pounds for 16-inch projectiles. This seemingly modest increase translated to devastating improvements in armor penetration and destructive power. An 18-inch shell could penetrate 26 inches of armor plate at 20,000 yards, considerably exceeding any existing battleship's protection. Naval architect Keiji Fukuda performed the mathematical calculations that would define Yamato's dimensions. To mount 9 18-inch guns in 3 triple turrets required a hull of unprecedented size and strength. Each turret weighed approximately 2,700 tons, equivalent to an entire destroyer. The barbette armor protecting the turret mechanisms extended deep into the hull, requiring structural reinforcement throughout the ship. Fukuda's calculations showed that accommodating these weapon systems, providing adequate armor protection, and maintaining reasonable speed demanded a displacement exceeding 70,000 tons. Construction authorization came in March 1937 under the Third Naval Armament Supplement Program. The project received designation No. 1 Battleship, with orders to construct the vessel in absolute secrecy. The Imperial Japanese Navy understood that revealing their super battleship program would provoke immediate American response. If the United States discovered Japan was building 70,000-ton battleships, American shipyards would construct even larger vessels, negating Japan's technological advantage through industrial superiority. Security measures surrounding Yamato's construction exceeded anything previously attempted in naval history. The Kure Naval Arsenal in Hiroshima Prefecture received the contract, selected partly because its location allowed screening from external observation. Engineers constructed massive canvas curtains and rope screens around the building dock, concealing the vessel from aerial reconnaissance. Guards patrolled constantly, with orders to shoot anyone attempting to photograph the facility. Workers signed secrecy oaths binding them to silence for 20 years after the war's conclusion. The security extended to subcontractors and suppliers. Companies manufacturing components received specifications without context. A factory might produce a massive steel forging without knowing it was destined for a battleship turret. Assembly occurred in sealed facilities, with different contractors handling separate sections. Only a handful of officers and senior engineers understood the complete design. Even Yamato's crew, when they eventually reported aboard, received no information about their vessel's true specifications. American intelligence gathering in pre-war Japan operated under severe constraints. The Japanese military had become increasingly paranoid about foreign espionage throughout the 1930s. Americans residing in Japan faced constant surveillance. The few intelligence operatives working undercover found access to naval facilities nearly impossible. Aerial reconnaissance remained technologically primitive, limited to what could be observed from commercial aircraft or ships passing Japanese waters. Lieutenant Commander Henry Smith Hutton, American naval attaché in Tokyo from 1936 to 1939, filed numerous reports attempting to assess Japanese naval construction. His dispatches reflected growing concern about Japanese capabilities, but contained no hint of the Yamato program. Japanese security measures had proven effective. Hutton reported observing increased activity at major naval arsenals and noted Japan's withdrawal from treaty limitations, but he estimated new Japanese battleships would displace perhaps 45,000 tons with 16-inch guns, projections that proved conservative by enormous margins. The construction of Yamato began with her keel laying on November 4, 1937. The ceremony occurred in complete secrecy, with only essential personnel present. No photographs were taken, no public announcements were made. As far as the world knew, Kure Naval Arsenal was constructing a standard battleship similar to those being built by other major navies. The massive steel plates arriving at the facility were explained as components for multiple smaller vessels. The enormous gun forgings were manufactured in remote locations and transported at night. Building a 72,000-ton battleship presented unprecedented engineering challenges. The hull required armor plate up to 16 inches thick on the main belt, with additional layers creating total protection exceeding 20 inches in critical areas. The weight of armor alone exceeded 20,000 tons, more than many complete warships. Yamato's deck armor reached 9 inches thick, designed to defeat plunging fire from long-range artillery. This horizontal protection far exceeded any contemporary battleship specifications. The main battery turrets represented triumphs of mechanical engineering. Each turret rotated on a massive ball-bearing assembly, requiring precision machining to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The gun barrels themselves, manufactured at the Kure Naval Arsenal's specialized facility, weighed 165 tons each and measured more than 70 feet long. Boring these massive tubes to maintain the necessary precision across their entire length required specialized equipment developed specifically for this project. Power requirements for Yamato matched her enormous size. 12 Kanpon boilers fed 4 steam turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower. This power plant, among the most powerful ever installed in a warship, could drive Yamato to 27 knots despite her massive displacement. The fuel capacity of 6,300 tons provided range exceeding 7,000 nautical miles at cruising speed, essential for Pacific operations across vast oceanic distances. While Yamato took shape in her sealed building dock, American intelligence continued attempting to assess Japanese naval construction. The outbreak of war in Europe in September 1939 complicated these efforts, as American attention focused on the Atlantic theatre. Japanese movements in China and increasing tensions over French Indochina occupied diplomatic attention. The question of how many battleships Japan was building and their specifications remained important but not urgent. America was not yet at war, and existing intelligence suggested Japanese capabilities, while respectable, did not exceed American understanding of naval architecture's practical limits. This complacency began eroding in late 1940 as more disturbing reports reached Washington. A British intelligence officer in Singapore forwarded information from a source within Japan's shipbuilding industry describing a new battleship of extraordinary size. The report lacked specific details but mentioned dimensions significantly exceeding any existing vessel. American analysts debated the information's credibility. Some argued the source might be describing an aircraft carrier, as Japan was known to be constructing large carrier vessels. Others suggested the report reflected propaganda designed to intimidate potential enemies. The critical error in American analysis was assuming Japanese naval architecture remained constrained by the same practical limitations affecting American designers. United States naval constructors understood that building a battleship displacing 70,000 tons was theoretically possible, but they considered it impractical. Such a vessel would require dock facilities that didn't exist in most ports. Its enormous draft would restrict operations to deep water. The resource investment would be staggering, diverting materials from other naval construction. American analysts projected Japanese thinking through American perspectives, assuming rational cost-benefit analysis would prevent construction of such an extreme design. What they failed to grasp was that Japanese naval strategy operated from fundamentally different premises. The Imperial Japanese Navy did not need a large fleet capable of projecting power globally like the United States Navy. Japan needed a smaller number of qualitatively superior vessels capable of achieving decisive victory in a single climactic battle. This concept, inherited from Admiral Togo's victory at Tsushima in 1905, shaped all Japanese naval thinking. If constructing 2 super battleships required the resources to build 3 conventional battleships, Japanese planners considered it an acceptable trade if those 2 vessels could defeat 4 enemy battleships in combat. Yamato launched on August 8, 1940, though this event too occurred under complete secrecy. Workers had constructed special high screens around the ways to prevent observation during the launching. The tide was carefully calculated to ensure Yamato would slide directly into deep water without grounding. Even the launch workers were selected for their reliability and commitment to secrecy. No champagne bottles were broken, no speeches given, no photographers present. The largest battleship ever constructed entered the water in silence, witnessed only by those whose duties absolutely required their presence. Fitting out required another year. The massive turrets were lifted into place using Kure Arsenal's heavy cranes, themselves upgraded specifically for this project. Miles of electrical wiring were installed. Thousands of smaller systems, from damage control equipment to crew accommodations, were integrated into the hull. The main battery fire control system, incorporating the most advanced range-finding and calculation equipment Japan could produce, was installed in the massive tower structure rising above the bridge. Yamato's secondary armament of 12 6-inch guns in 4 triple turrets was mounted, along with dozens of smaller anti-aircraft weapons. During this fitting-out period, American intelligence received its first solid indication that something unusual was under construction at Kure. A reconnaissance flight by a commercial aircraft passing near the arsenal captured distant photographs showing what appeared to be an extraordinarily large hull alongside the fitting-out pier. The images, taken from several miles away with inadequate cameras, lacked detail but showed a vessel of remarkable size. analysis suggested the hull measured approximately 800 feet long, confirming reports of Japanese super battleship construction. However, even these photographs failed to convey Yamato's true scale. The analysts examining them estimated displacement at perhaps 50,000 tons, still well below actual specifications. The main battery turrets, not yet fully installed when the photographs were taken, appeared large but not impossibly so. The consensus remained that Japan was building very large battleships, probably exceeding treaty limitations by substantial margins, but not vessels fundamentally different from American or British heavy units. Yamato completed her trials in the inland sea during September and October 1941. The sea trials demonstrated performance meeting or exceeding design specifications. The main battery achieved its designed range of 42,000 meters. The armor successfully resisted test firing from destroyer guns. Speed trials confirmed the ability to sustain 27 knots. Minor issues were identified and corrected, but overall Yamato represented a complete success from an engineering perspective. The Imperial Japanese Navy had succeeded in building the most powerful battleship ever constructed, and the rest of the world remained largely unaware. On December 7th, 1941, Japan launched its attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the Pacific War. Yamato was commissioned just 9 days later on December 16th, with Captain Gihachi Takayanagi assuming command. But the new battleship played no role in the Pearl Harbor attack or the initial Japanese offensive across the Pacific. Admiral Yamamoto, now commander of the combined fleet, chose to preserve his secret weapon for the decisive battle he anticipated would occur once American forces recovered from their initial defeats. The first 6 months of the Pacific War brought stunning Japanese victories across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. The Philippines fell, followed by Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma. Japanese forces swept across the Central Pacific, seizing Wake Island, Guam, and numerous other positions. American naval power had been severely damaged at Pearl Harbor, with the battleship force temporarily eliminated as an effective fighting force. Japan appeared unstoppable, and American intelligence desperately needed information about Japanese naval capabilities. Fragmentary reports of large Japanese battleships began reaching Allied intelligence throughout early 1942. Australian coastwatchers reported sighting massive warships passing through the Solomon Islands. Submarine commanders described enormous vessels operating near Truk. These reports shared common elements suggesting ships significantly larger than known Japanese battleships, but they lack the detail needed for accurate assessment. Observers estimated dimensions based on brief visual sightings under combat conditions, often at extreme distances. The resulting reports contained substantial errors and contradictions. Commander Jasper Holmes, serving with Station Hypo, the US Navy's cryptographic center at Pearl Harbor, began collecting these reports in an attempt to build a comprehensive picture of Japanese naval strength. Holmes had served as a submarine commander before transferring to intelligence work, giving him practical experience evaluating combat reports. He recognized that individual sightings might be inaccurate, but patterns emerging across multiple independent reports often revealed underlying truth. By May 1942, Holmes had accumulated 23 separate reports describing Japanese battleships of unusual size. 17 of these reports mentioned seeing a vessel considerably larger than known Japanese units. 8 reports specifically mentioned turrets appearing abnormally large. 3 reports from experienced submarine commanders included estimates of main battery caliber exceeding 16 inches based on turret size and proportions. Holmes prepared a summary memorandum arguing that Japan had constructed at least one, and possibly 2 or more, super battleships displacing perhaps 60,000 tons with main batteries of 17 or 18-inch guns. His memorandum triggered intense debate within American naval intelligence. Some analysts accepted Holmes's conclusions, arguing the accumulated evidence demanded recognition that Japan had exceeded all expectations in battleship design. Others remained skeptical, suggesting the reports reflected observation errors or propaganda. The skeptics pointed out that no hard evidence existed, no clear photographs, no captured documents, no defector testimony. They argued that assuming Japanese capabilities far exceeded American achievements without concrete proof represented dangerous speculation. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, chief of the War Plans Division, summarized the skeptical position in a June 1942 memorandum. Turner acknowledged the reports suggesting large Japanese battleships, but argued they should be interpreted cautiously. He noted that observers under combat stress frequently overestimated enemy capabilities. The psychological impact of Japan's early victories might be causing Allied personnel to attribute supernatural capabilities to Japanese forces. Turner recommended assuming Japanese battleships displaced no more than 50,000 tons until definitive evidence proved otherwise. The Battle of Midway, in June 1942, provided the first confirmed sighting of Yamato by American forces, though the identification remained uncertain at the time. The battleship served as Admiral Yamamoto's flagship, positioned with the main body of the combined fleet approximately 300 miles behind the carrier striking force. After Japanese carriers were destroyed, Yamamoto briefly considered bringing Yamato forward to engage American forces in a surface action, but reconnaissance reports of American strength convinced him to withdraw. Several American aircraft sighted Yamato during the battle, though none attacked the heavily defended main body. Pilots reported seeing an exceptionally large battleship unlike any previously encountered, but their reports focused primarily on force composition rather than detailed vessel specifications. Photo reconnaissance aircraft captured images from high altitude showing Japanese formations, but the resolution proved insufficient for precise analysis. Intelligence officers examining the photographs could confirm the presence of large battleships, but could not definitively determine their specifications. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, head of Station Hypo, became increasingly convinced that Japan possessed super battleships based on communications intelligence patterns. Rochefort's team had broken portions of the Japanese naval code, allowing them to read some enemy communications. While Japanese security prevented direct discussion of specifications, the patterns of communication suggested that certain vessels received special consideration. References to specific battleships used code words that appeared only in the context of these vessels, suggesting they possessed unusual importance. One breakthrough came from analyzing Japanese radio traffic during Yamato's movements. When the battleship departed or arrived at major bases, the volume and priority of communications increased significantly compared to movements by other battleships. This suggested Yamato held special status within the combined fleet. Additionally, communications discussing fleet dispositions sometimes reference positioning Yamato at maximum range from enemy forces, implying its value exceeded that of other units. By late 1942, the accumulated evidence had convinced most American intelligence analysts that Japan possessed at least one battleship significantly exceeding previous specifications. The debate had shifted from whether such vessels existed to determine their exact capabilities and numbers. Captain Edwin Layton, intelligence officer for Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Chester Nimitz, prepared an assessment in November 1942 estimating Japanese super battleships displaced approximately 65,000 tons with 18-inch main batteries. His estimate came remarkably close to actual specifications, but without confirming evidence, it remained speculation. The challenge facing American intelligence was obtaining definitive proof. Japanese security remained airtight. No documents describing Yamato had been captured. No defectors with direct knowledge had emerged. Photo reconnaissance of Japanese naval bases proved difficult due to distance and enemy air defenses. The few photographs obtained showed vessels at extreme distances or under camouflage, preventing accurate measurement. American submarines operating near Japanese bases faced intense anti-submarine measures, limiting their ability to conduct detailed reconnaissance. A partial breakthrough came in February 1943 when submarine USS Wahoo successfully penetrated the Sea of Japan through the narrow strait separating Korea from Japan. Commander Dudley Morton conducted aggressive patrols near major naval facilities, gathering intelligence while sinking enemy shipping. On February 10th, Morton observed Yamato departing Kure Naval Arsenal, bound for Truk Lagoon. The submarine tracked the battleship for several hours, allowing Morton to make detailed observations and take periscope photographs. Morton's report, received at Pearl Harbor on March 1st after Wahoo's return through the dangerous Strait Passage, provided the most detailed description yet compiled of Japanese super battleships. Morton estimated the vessel's length at 863 feet, beam at 128 feet, and displacement at 70,000 tons. He described massive main battery turrets that dwarfed anything on American battleships. The secondary battery of 6-inch guns appeared comparable to the main batteries on some cruisers. Most significantly, Morton's periscope photographs, while taken from considerable distance, clearly showed a vessel of unprecedented size. The photographs triggered immediate analysis at Fleet Intelligence. Specialists measured the turrets against known reference points, calculating gun barrel length and diameter. Their conclusions shocked even those who had suspected Japanese super battleship construction. The main battery guns appeared to be at least 18 inches in diameter, possibly larger. Each turret housed 3 guns, with 3 turrets providing a 9-gun broadside. The vessel's armor belts stood noticeably higher above the waterline than American battleships, suggesting armor thickness far exceeding American standards. Captain Thomas Brownrigg, assigned to analyze Morton's photographs, prepared a detailed assessment concluding that Japan had constructed battleships displacing at least 70,000 tons with 18-inch main batteries. His March 15th memorandum, the same document Commander Zacharias had been reading when additional reports arrived, represented the first official American recognition of Yamato's true capabilities. Brownrigg calculated that such a vessel would possess armor protection capable of resisting hits from any existing naval gun at all but point-blank range. Its main battery could penetrate the heaviest armor on any American or British battleship at ranges exceeding 25,000 yards. The strategic implications of Brownrigg's assessment demanded immediate attention. If Japan possessed even one such vessel, let alone multiple units, American battleship forces faced opponents they could not defeat in a fair fight. The Iowa-class battleships, representing America's most modern capital ships, displaced 45,000 tons and mounted 16-inch guns. In a direct engagement with Yamato, an Iowa would face an opponent with 60% greater displacement, guns that outranged American weapons by 5,000 yards, and armor impervious to American shells at ranges where American armor could be penetrated. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, received Brownrigg's assessment with deep concern. King had spent his career in the surface navy and understood battleship combat intimately. He recognized that a single vessel like Yamato could theoretically engage and defeat multiple American battleships if handled properly. More disturbing was the realization that Japan might possess several such vessels, as building one super battleship made little strategic sense. If Japan had allocated resources to construct one Yamato, they had probably built at least one sister ship, possibly more. King convened a special conference in late March 1943 to assess American options. The attendees included senior intelligence officers, naval architects, and operational commanders. Captain Andrew McKee, chief naval constructor, presented analysis showing that matching Japanese super battleships would require constructing vessels displacing at least 60,000 tons. Such battleships would require completely new design approaches, new dock facilities, and massive resource allocation. Construction time would exceed 3 years from design approval to commissioning. The conference reached several key conclusions. First, attempting to match Yamato with equivalent American super battleships was impractical, given time constraints and resource demands. Second, existing American battleships could not safely engage Yamato in surface combat without significant numerical superiority. Third, American strategy should emphasize using carriers, submarines, and aircraft to neutralize Yamato rather than engaging in surface warfare. Fourth, intelligence efforts should focus on locating and tracking Yamato to prevent it from achieving surprise against American forces. These conclusions shaped American Pacific strategy for the remainder of the war. The carrier task forces that had proven decisive at Coral Sea and Midway received additional priority and resource allocation. Submarine commanders received orders to report any sightings of large Japanese battleships immediately, even at the cost of abandoning attack opportunities. Photo reconnaissance missions over Japanese naval bases received high priority. The goal was ensuring that Yamato could never surprise American forces and exploit its overwhelming advantages in a surface engagement. Through mid-1943, American intelligence continued piecing together information about the Yamato-class. Communications intelligence suggested at least 2 vessels of this class were operational, designated Number 1 Battleship and Number 2 Battleship in Japanese communications. Analysis of construction schedules suggested both vessels had completed in late 1941 or early 1942, meaning they had been available throughout the early Pacific campaign. The mystery of why such powerful vessels had been employed so conservatively sparked extensive debate. Some analysts suggested Japanese doctrine reserved Yamato for the decisive battle that would determine Pacific control. Others argued that fuel shortages increasingly constraining Japanese operations limited Yamato's deployment. A third theory held that Japanese commanders were conserving their super battleships because Japan's industrial capacity could not replace such vessels if lost, while American industrial production could replace losses of smaller vessels relatively easily. All 3 theories contained elements of truth, though American intelligence lacked information to determine which factors dominated Japanese decision-making. August 1943 brought another breakthrough when a coastwatcher network operating in the Solomon Islands reported Yamato passing through Bougainville Strait. The vessel was conducting a supply and reinforcement run to forces in the Solomon Islands, a mission that struck American analysts as peculiar given the vessel's capabilities. Using such a powerful unit for routine transport duty suggested either Japanese desperation regarding the Solomon Islands campaign, or such confidence in Yamato's invulnerability that employing it for secondary missions seemed reasonable. Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific forces, immediately ordered airstrikes against the reported Japanese force. Multiple carrier groups launched search and attack missions, with strict orders that locating and attacking the large battleship took absolute priority. However, Japanese air cover proved effective and weather deteriorated, preventing American aircraft from locating the formation. Yamato completed its mission and withdrew without being engaged, demonstrating that even when American forces knew approximately where the battleship operated, finding and attacking it remained extraordinarily difficult. The failure to locate and attack Yamato despite knowing its general location prompted reassessment of American tactics. Admiral Nimitz requested analysis of how many aircraft would be required to ensure Yamato's destruction if located. The resulting study, completed in September 1943, concluded that attacking Yamato would require at minimum 100 carrier aircraft in a coordinated strike. The massive armor protection would resist bomb hits that would sink smaller warships. The numerous anti-aircraft guns would inflict severe casualties on attacking aircraft. Successfully sinking Yamato would require concentrating overwhelming force in a single coordinated attack. Autumn 1943 brought additional sightings as Yamato operated in defense of the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Submarines reported the battleship's presence near Truk Lagoon on multiple occasions. High-altitude reconnaissance aircraft captured photographs showing large battleships at anchor, though image quality remained insufficient for positive identification. Each sighting was carefully logged and analysed, slowly building a comprehensive picture of Yamato's operational patterns and capabilities. The most significant intelligence breakthrough came not from observation, but from a captured Japanese document. In November 1943, American forces seized Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands after brutal fighting. Among the documents recovered was a fragment of a Japanese naval reference manual describing characteristics of Imperial Japanese Navy vessels. Most of the manual had been destroyed before capture, but the fragment that survived included a partial table listing battleship specifications. The entry for Number 1 Battleship listed displacement as 72,810 tons, with a main battery of 9 46-centimeter guns. This document provided the first confirmed specifications for Yamato, 46 centimeters translated to 18.1 inches, confirming the main battery caliber. The displacement figure of 72,000 tons exceeded previous estimates by approximately 10%. American naval architects immediately began calculations to determine what such a vessel's combat capabilities would be. The conclusions were sobering. At 72,000 tons displacement with 18-inch guns, Yamato possessed firepower and protection exceeding any existing warship by enormous margins. The armor protection, calculated based on the displacement and known Japanese design practices, probably included a 16-inch main belt with additional backing, creating total protection approaching 20 inches. The deck armor likely reached 8 to 9 inches, far exceeding American battleship protection. Such armour would be essentially impervious to 16-inch gunfire at any realistic combat range. The main battery's capabilities were even more concerning. 18-inch guns firing 3,200-pound armour-piercing shells could penetrate 26 inches of steel plate at 20,000 yards. At 30,000 yards, penetration would still exceed 15 inches. The shells would retain lethal energy across distances where American shells would bounce off Yamato's armour. In a surface engagement, Yamato could engage American battleships at ranges where American return fire would be ineffective, picking off opponents one by one while remaining essentially invulnerable. These calculations prompted Admiral King to issue revised instructions for any potential surface engagement with Yamato. American battleships were ordered to avoid surface action with Yamato-class vessels unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority. If forced into engagement, American vessels should attempt to close range rapidly to reduce Yamato's advantage, while accepting that closing range would expose them to devastating fire. The best tactical approach was avoiding surface engagement entirely, relying on air power and submarines to neutralize the threat. December 1943 brought an unexpected opportunity when Yamato departed Truk Lagoon for return to Japan. American submarines tracking the movement reported the battleship's course, allowing Admiral Spruance to position Task Force 50, centered on 6 fleet carriers, to intercept. Weather conditions were ideal for air operations, visibility was excellent, and American forces had time to plan a coordinated strike. Everything seemed perfect for the first major attack on Yamato. The strike launched on December 15th with 120 aircraft from 3 carriers. The formation included torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters to suppress anti-aircraft fire. The attack plan called for simultaneous coordinated strikes from multiple directions, overwhelming Yamato's defences through sheer numbers and preventing the battleship from concentrating anti-aircraft fire effectively. Intelligence officers had briefed pilots on Yamato's specifications, emphasizing that scoring hits would require persistence, as the armour would resist many weapons that would damage lighter vessels. The actual attack demonstrated both the difficulty of sinking such a heavily armoured vessel and the effectiveness of carrier air power when properly concentrated. American aircraft achieved complete surprise, with Yamato's combat air patrol being engaged and driven off before the main strike arrived. The first wave scored 3 torpedo hits and 2 bomb hits within minutes. Observers reported massive explosions and fires breaking out along the battleship's superstructure. Damage appeared severe, and pilots returned to their carriers confident they had struck a devastating blow. However, reconnaissance aircraft maintaining surveillance reported Yamato continuing on course at reduced but substantial speed. The apparent damage, while impressive, had not seriously impaired the battleship's fighting capability. The torpedo hits had struck the heavily armoured belt, causing flooding in void spaces and outer compartments, but failing to penetrate to vital areas. The bomb hits had damaged the superstructure and caused casualties, but had not reached any critical systems. Yamato's armour had performed exactly as designed, resisting attacks that would have crippled lighter vessels. A second strike launched that afternoon scored additional hits, but with similar results. 2 more torpedoes struck home, and 3 bombs hit. Fires intensified, and Yamato developed a slight list, but the battleship remained operational and continued toward Japan. American pilots were amazed and frustrated by the vessel's apparent invulnerability. They had delivered attacks that would have sunk any other warship twice over, yet Yamato stubbornly refused to sink or even slow significantly. Spruance faced a difficult decision. Continuing attacks would require remaining in the area overnight, exposing his task force to potential Japanese submarine and air attack. Fuel considerations for the escorting destroyers were becoming critical. The weather forecast predicted deteriorating conditions. Most significantly, intelligence indicated Japanese forces were moving to intercept his task force. Weighing all factors, Spruance concluded that sinking Yamato was not worth risking his carriers. He ordered the task force to break off and withdraw, leaving Yamato to reach Japan. The December 15th attack provided invaluable combat data about Yamato's defensive capabilities. Analysis of pilot reports and reconnaissance photographs allowed intelligence officers to assess the effects of various weapons against the battleship's armour. Torpedoes striking the main armour belt appeared almost useless unless achieving hits in concentration, Bombs required direct hits on deck armor to have any chance of reaching vital spaces, and even then might not penetrate. The most effective approach appeared to be concentrating overwhelming force in a single coordinated attack, achieving so many hits that cumulative damage overwhelmed defensive measures. The attack also demonstrated that Yamato was vulnerable to air power despite its impressive defenses. The battleship had survived this attack, but only by accepting significant damage that required months of repair. Had American forces been able to mount repeated strikes over several days, cumulative damage would eventually have proven fatal. The key was concentration of force and sustained pressure, denying the Japanese time to conduct repairs or reinforce air defenses. January 1944 brought confirmation that at least 2 Yamato-class battleships were operational. Submarine USS Skate encountered both vessels departing Kure Naval Arsenal and Company, bound for Truk. Lieutenant Commander Eugene McKinney tracked the formation for several hours, radioing detailed reports while remaining undetected. McKinney's dispatch confirmed the sister ship, designated Musashi, matched Yamato in all respects. Japan possessed not one but 2 70,000-ton battleships, doubling the threat American forces faced. The presence of 2 super battleships complicated American strategic planning. Concentrating sufficient force to attack one vessel was challenging. Preparing for the possibility of both operating together was even more difficult. Admiral Nimitz requested additional carrier allocations for the Pacific Fleet, specifically to ensure adequate strength for engaging Yamato-class vessels. The build-up of American carrier forces in the Pacific through 1944 partly reflected this requirement to mass, overwhelming strength against Japan's super battleships. Through spring 1944, American intelligence tracked both Yamato-class vessels as they operated in defense of Japan's contracting perimeter. Yamato remained at Truk until February, when the massive American carrier raid on that base forced its evacuation. Musashi operated primarily from Linga Roads near Singapore, positioned to defend Japan's critical oil supply lines from the Dutch East Indies. Both battleships conducted relatively few offensive operations, instead being held as mobile reserves to counter American advances. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 represented the first engagement where American forces knowingly faced Yamato-class battleships prepared for surface action. Both Yamato and Musashi were present with the Japanese fleet as it attempted to counter the American invasion of Saipan. American search aircraft located the Japanese formation early on June 19th, reporting the presence of large battleships. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, immediately ordered his battleship commanders to avoid surface engagement with the Japanese battle line. Instead, Spruance relied on his carrier forces to eliminate the Japanese threat at long range. The Battle of the Philippine Sea became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American carrier aircraft and combat air patrol destroyed the attacking Japanese carrier strikes. American submarine forces sank 2 Japanese fleet carriers. By the battle's conclusion, Japanese carrier aviation had been effectively destroyed as a combat force, but the battleship units including Yamato and Musashi had escaped without engaging. The October 1944 Battle of Leyte Gulf finally brought Yamato and Musashi into major surface combat. The Japanese plan divided their naval forces into 3 groups to attack American invasion forces at Leyte. Admiral Kurita's center force, including both Yamato and Musashi, would transit San Bernardino Strait and attack the invasion beaches from the north. 2 other forces would attack from the south and serve as decoys to draw American carriers away from Leyte. October 24th brought the climactic confrontation as Kurita's center force transited the Sibuyan Sea. American carrier aircraft from Task Force 38 located the formation early and launched massive strikes throughout the day. Musashi became the focus of repeated attacks as American commanders recognized the super battleship represented the greatest threat in Kurita's force. 5 separate strikes attacked Musashi over 6 hours, delivering at least 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits. The cumulative damage finally overwhelmed even Musashi's massive armor protection. Flooding from the torpedo hits grew progressively worse as damage control parties were killed and equipment destroyed. The battleship developed an increasing list that eventually reached 15 degrees, making further operations impossible. At 7:35 p.m., Captain Toshihiro Inoguchi ordered abandon ship. Musashi capsized and sank at 7:55 p.m. in the Sibuyan Sea, taking over 1,000 crewmen with her. The sinking of Musashi demonstrated that concentrated air power could destroy even a Yamato-class battleship, but only through sustained attack delivering dozens of hits. American forces had committed over 200 sorties to the attacks that ultimately sank Musashi. This represented the concentrated striking power of multiple fleet carriers focused on a single target. The implication was clear: sinking a Yamato-class vessel required dedicating massive resources that could not be spared while other threats existed. Yamato survived the Battle of Leyte Gulf despite also being attacked, though less intensively than Musashi. The battleship took bomb hits causing significant casualties and damage, but remained operational. On October 25th, Yamato finally engaged American surface forces during the Battle off Samar, one of the most dramatic surface actions in the Pacific War. Admiral Kurita's center force, having transited San Bernardino Strait during the night, encountered a group of 6 escort carriers screened by destroyers and destroyer escorts. These light vessels, designated Taffy 3, represented the only American forces standing between Kurita's battleships and the vulnerable amphibious vessels at Leyte Gulf. The engagement began at dawn when Japanese lookouts spotted the American carriers. Kurita immediately ordered general attack, and Yamato opened fire with her main battery at a range of 35,000 yards, over 17 miles. The 18-inch shells created enormous splashes visible for miles, each one capable of sinking an escort carrier with a single hit. American sailors watching the massive coloured splashes approaching their ships, the Japanese used different dye colours for each vessel to spot fall of shot, experienced terror unlike anything they had faced before. Commander Ernest Evans, commanding the destroyer USS Johnston, made the suicidal decision to charge directly at the Japanese battle line to buy time for the escort carriers to escape. Johnston and 2 other destroyers, supported by 4 destroyer escorts, attacked with torpedoes and gunfire against overwhelming odds. Their sacrifice drew Japanese attention and disrupted the formation, preventing an organized pursuit of the carriers. Yamato maneuvered to avoid torpedoes, turning away from the battle and temporarily losing contact with the American carriers. The confused action lasted over 2 hours. Yamato fired 104 rounds from her main battery, the only occasion during the war when the battleship's primary weapons engaged enemy surface vessels in combat. American forces fought with desperate courage, making smoke screens, launching torpedo attacks, and maintaining a fighting retreat. 3 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort was sunk, but the remainder of Taffy 3 survived. Kurita, rattled by the fierce resistance and fearing American carrier forces might be approaching, ordered a withdrawal despite being on the verge of a decisive victory. The Battle off Samar demonstrated both Yamato's power and the limitations of even the most powerful battleship without proper reconnaissance and command coordination. Yamato's main battery had proven capable of engaging targets at extraordinary ranges, but hitting small, fast-moving vessels at such distances proved nearly impossible. The battleship had fired over 100 enormous shells, each costing as much as a small house, and achieved perhaps 2 or 3 hits. Had Kurita pressed the attack instead of withdrawing, Yamato could have methodically destroyed the American force, but the opportunity passed. After Leyte Gulf, Yamato retreated to Japan for repairs and remained in home waters as Japan's defensive perimeter contracted. American forces captured Iwo Jima in March 1945, providing bases for fighter escorts that allowed B-29 bombers to strike Japan with relative impunity. The invasion of Okinawa, scheduled for April 1945, would bring American forces within 300 miles of Japan's home islands. Desperate to prevent this foothold so close to the homeland, Japanese commanders conceived Operation Ten-Go, a suicide mission for Yamato. The plan called for Yamato to beach itself on Okinawa's shores and use its main battery as a fixed artillery battery supporting the garrison's defense. The battleship would deliberately run aground, making itself immune to torpedoes and allowing the crew to fight as infantry once ammunition was exhausted. It was a mission with no possibility of return, but Japanese commanders believed the symbolism of their greatest warship dying in defense of Okinawa might inspire the garrison to extended resistance. Yamato departed Tokuyama on April 6, 1945, accompanied by the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers. The force carried only enough fuel for a one-way trip to Okinawa, as Japan's fuel supplies had been exhausted to the point where allocating resources for a return voyage was impossible. Vice Admiral Seiji Ito commanded the mission despite arguing against what he considered a pointless sacrifice. Ito understood his force stood no chance against American air power, but orders came from the highest levels of command. American intelligence detected Yamato's departure within hours. Submarines USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback spotted the formation and radioed contact reports. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding 5th Fleet, immediately ordered Task Force 58 to intercept. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding the Fast Carrier Task Force, assembled a strike force of nearly 400 aircraft from multiple carrier groups. Every available bomber would participate in what was expected to be the final destruction of Japan's super battleship. April 7th dawned clear and calm, ideal weather for air operations. American search aircraft located Yamato at 8:23 a.m., approximately 200 miles southwest of Kyushu, steaming south toward Okinawa at 20 knots. The first strike wave launched at 10 a.m., comprising 280 aircraft. Additional waves followed, ensuring continuous pressure on the Japanese formation. Mitcher was taking no chances. He would overwhelm Yamato with sheer numbers, delivering so many hits that no armor could resist. The attacks began at 12:30 p.m. Yamato's captain, Rear Admiral Kosaku Aruga, who had assumed command after her previous captain was killed at Leyte Gulf, ordered maximum speed and began radical evasive maneuvers. The battleship's anti-aircraft batteries, including 24 5-inch guns and over 150 smaller weapons, opened fire, creating a dense wall of steel. The escorting vessels added their firepower, filling the sky with tracers and exploding shells. Several American aircraft fell in the initial minutes, but the attacks continued with unrelenting pressure. Torpedo bombers attacked from both sides simultaneously, forcing Yamato to choose which threat to evade. When the battleship turned to avoid torpedoes from port, the starboard attackers achieved perfect setup for their runs. The first torpedoes struck within minutes, hitting the port side and causing immediate flooding. Damage control parties rushed to seal the breaches, but before repairs could be completed, more torpedoes struck. Bombs fell simultaneously, penetrating the deck armor that had resisted previous attacks. One bomb struck the main battery turret number 2, penetrating through to the magazine but miraculously failing to detonate the powder charges. The attacks continued for nearly 2 hours in waves that seemed endless to the Japanese crews. Each time one strike departed, another arrived. Yamato absorbed hit after hit, her armor holding remarkably well against individual strikes but gradually being overwhelmed by cumulative damage. Flooding increased steadily as more compartments were breached. The Lister port grew progressively worse as counter-flooding measures proved inadequate. Fire broke out in multiple locations, with damage control parties being killed before they could contain the blazes. By 2 p.m., Yamato had taken at least 12 torpedo hits and 7 bomb hits. The battleship had slowed to 6 knots, listing 15 degrees to port and trailing oil. Admiral Ito, recognizing the end was near, ordered all ships to proceed independently to Okinawa, while Yamato attempted to draw off the attackers. The escorting vessels reluctantly complied, leaving the dying battleship to face the final attacks alone. Several destroyers remained nearby, unwilling to abandon their flagship even under direct orders. The final blow came at 2:05 p.m., when several torpedoes struck in rapid succession on Yamato's port side. The cumulative flooding overwhelmed all damage control efforts. The list increased rapidly, reaching 30 degrees within minutes. Captain Aruga ordered abandon ship at 2:20 p.m. as the list approached 45 degrees. Yamato capsized to port at 2:23 p.m., exposing her massive hull to the sky. The battleship remained visible for several seconds before the forward magazines detonated in an enormous explosion visible for over 100 miles. The explosion, recorded by American pilots who described a mushroom cloud rising 6,000 feet into the air, marked the end of the largest battleship ever built. Yamato sank in less than 3 hours of concentrated air attack, taking with her approximately 2,800 officers and crew, including Admiral Ito and Captain Aruga. Only 280 men survived to be rescued by the escorting destroyers. The light cruiser Yahagi and 4 of the 8 destroyers were also sunk in the action. American losses totaled 10 aircraft and 12 aircrew. The sinking of Yamato represented the final demonstration that even the most powerful battleship was obsolete in the face of carrier air power. Japan had invested enormous resources constructing these super battleships, diverting materials and industrial capacity that could have built dozens of smaller vessels or hundreds of aircraft. The return on investment proved catastrophic. Yamato had fired its main battery in combat once, at the Battle off Samar, achieving minimal results. The vessel spent most of the war in port or fleeing from American carrier forces. Its final mission was a suicide operation, deliberately wasting the ship in a gesture of defiance that accomplished nothing. American intelligence officers studying the wreckage and survivor interrogations finally obtained complete specifications for the Yamato-class. The displacement of 72,810 tons had been accurate. The main battery of 9 18.1-inch guns represented the largest naval rifles ever mounted on a warship. The armor protection, with a 16-inch main belt backed by additional plates, creating total thickness exceeding 20 inches in places, had been the heaviest ever installed. Yamato could have defeated any other battleship in single combat, but that combat never occurred because American strategy correctly identified battleships as obsolete. The intelligence failure regarding Yamato was not in eventually discovering its existence, but in the years of uncertainty when American forces operated without knowing what they faced. Japanese security measures had successfully concealed the super battleship program through the critical period when intervention might have been possible. By the time American intelligence confirmed Yamato's capabilities, the vessel was operational and any counter-construction would arrive too late to influence the war's outcome. The story of Yamato and American intelligence efforts to understand it reveals several important lessons about military intelligence and naval warfare. First, adversaries will pursue technological solutions that challenge conventional assumptions. American analysts erred in assuming Japanese designers would be constrained by the same practical considerations affecting American construction. Second, intelligence collection requires multiple complementary sources. No single report or photograph revealed Yamato's capabilities. Only the patient accumulation of fragmentary evidence eventually produced accurate assessment. Third, technological superiority in one dimension may be irrelevant if the overall strategic context has shifted. Yamato represented the ultimate expression of battleship design, but battleships themselves had become obsolete. The final irony was that American intelligence devoted enormous effort to understanding a weapon system that proved largely irrelevant to the Pacific War's outcome. Carrier aviation, submarine warfare, and amphibious operations determined the conflict's course. Yamato and Musashi represented massive investments of resources that contributed almost nothing to Japan's war effort. The battleships were simultaneously the most impressive and most useless vessels either side constructed, monuments to a bygone era of warfare that had ended before they were completed. For American intelligence officers who spent years piecing together fragmentary reports about impossible specifications, the confirmation of Yamato's capabilities brought mixed emotions. They had been correct that Japan possessed revolutionary super battleships, but they had also witnessed those super battleships being destroyed by the carrier aviation that represented warfare's future. Commander Jasper Holmes, who had compiled the early reports suggesting super battleship construction, later wrote that discovering Yamato's specifications was intellectually satisfying but strategically irrelevant. The question was not whether such vessels existed, but why Japan had built them. The battleship era had ended not with a climactic surface engagement between capital ships, but with aircraft destroying stationary targets. Yamato never fought the decisive battle its designers envisioned. Instead, it died under aerial bombardment, unable to return fire against enemies beyond its weapons' reach. The most powerful battleship ever constructed, the vessel so large that American intelligence initially dismissed reports as impossible, proved that size and firepower meant nothing when the nature of warfare had fundamentally changed. Today, Yamato rests 345 meters below the surface of the East China Sea, a tomb for the thousands who died aboard and a monument to military obsolescence. The battleship that American intelligence struggled years to understand became a cautionary tale about preparing to fight the previous war. Japan had built the ultimate battleship exactly when battleships ceased to matter, investing enormous resources in outdated technology, while their enemies developed the weapons systems that would define modern naval warfare. The great irony was that American intelligence officers who initially doubted Yamato's existence were partially correct to be skeptical, not because the specifications were impossible, but because building such a vessel was strategically irrational.